What was the inspiration behind that build? When I saw it sitting out in the field, something clicked. I knew I had to do something with it, and I wanted it to be a military tribute. Take a look at the tailgate, that's where the whole story is. Stacey David did not disappear because television forgot about him. He disappeared because television changed into something he no longer recognized. For close to a decade he was the host millions of gearheads actually trusted: untamed hair, a steady voice, real tools, and zero manufactured drama. Then, right at the peak of his most popular show, he simply walked away. No farewell tour, no scandal, no campaign to get his old job back. The surprising part isn't that he stepped back. It's that he may have been the only host of his generation clear-headed enough to leave before the industry could hollow out what made him worth watching. The builder before the cameras. Long before Stacey David became a familiar face on automotive television, he was already someone who couldn't leave a machine alone. Growing up in Boise, Idaho, his fascination with cars, bikes, and engines went beyond simple admiration. He wanted to understand what made them run, what made them fail, and what could be improved with enough patience. That curiosity matters because Stacey's entire on-screen identity grew out of something authentic. He was never an actor playing the role of a mechanic. He was a mechanic who eventually ended up in front of a camera. As a teenager, he cut his teeth on go-karts, motorcycles, salvaged engines, and any mechanical project he could get his hands on. That obsession taught him the most valuable lesson in fabrication. Nothing stays impossible once you understand how it's assembled. Along the way he picked up welding, fabrication, diagnostics, and the kind of improvisational problem-solving that only comes from years in a real shop, not a scripted one. Cars weren't his only outlet. Stacey spent time in Nashville working as a professional guitarist, playing sessions and touring with various acts before automotive television entered the picture. That chapter explains why his builds always felt different. He never treated a project like a checklist of parts to bolt on. He treated it like composing a song, where every vehicle needed rhythm, tone, and a personality of its own. That rare combination, mechanic, fabricator, musician, storyteller, made him a natural fit once television came calling. When trucks changed automotive TV. The show that made him a household name launched in 1999 on what was then TNN, later folded into Spike TV's automotive lineup. It arrived at exactly the right moment. Automotive television was still figuring out its identity, and audiences were tired of polished commercials disguised as content. They wanted real builds, real tools, real mistakes, and a host who wouldn't talk down to them. Stacey David became that host, turning the show into something like a nationwide garage class, walking viewers through suspension geometry, welding, bodywork, engine swaps, and exhaust routing without ever making anyone feel stupid. That was his real gift. He made complicated work feel within reach. Nobody watched Stacey and thought, that's for professionals only. They watched him and thought, maybe I could try that myself. That was the actual power of the show. It didn't just entertain people, it activated them. Backyard builders, young mechanics, shop students, fathers working alongside their kids, and anyone with a half-finished project under a tarp saw something of themselves in him. The builds helped cement that connection. Copperhead, his 1967 Chevy C10, became one of the most recognizable project trucks in automotive TV history. Crazy Horse, a custom 1966 Ford Bronco, became a fan favorite in its own right. These weren't just backdrops for an episode, they functioned like recurring characters. Viewers tracked their progress across seasons and remembered them long after the credits rolled. Why Stacey felt different? The reason Stacey connected the way he did comes down to something simple. He respected his audience. He never treated viewers like passive spectators waiting to be dazzled by a finished product. He treated them like future builders. A lot of television personalities perform expertise for the camera. Stacey actually taught it. He slowed down, explained his reasoning out loud, and walked through the process instead of skipping straight to the reveal. That teaching instinct is exactly why his eventual absence felt so personal to longtime fans. They weren't just losing a host, they were losing an instructor, someone who made a cluttered garage feel a little less intimidating and turned aspirational into achievable. That approach also explains why his work aged better than a lot of shows from the same era. Automotive entertainment got louder and more dramatic as the 2000s wore on. Shop employees shouted for the cameras, deadlines were exaggerated, and disagreements became recurring storylines. Builds shifted from being about learning toward being about conflict. Stacey's best work never needed any of that because a good build already contains real conflict on its own. Rust that won't grind off, a shrinking budget, parts that don't fit, tools that fail at the worst moment, and the satisfaction of solving one stubborn problem at a time. That's authentic drama, not staged shouting matches. The real tension is simply whether the thing you imagined in your head can become steel and rubber sitting in front of you. The quiet exit from trucks. Then, at the height of the show's popularity, Stacey was gone. That's the moment that created the mystery fans still talk about. Viewers tuned in expecting the same energy and instead found a show that suddenly felt different. There was no big farewell episode, no emotional goodbye, no lengthy explanation. One season he was the face of the program. The next era had already begun without him. That silence naturally led to speculation. Was he fired? Did he burn out? Was he pushed aside? Did he quit television entirely? The truth, pieced together by fans over the years, is less scandalous but far more revealing. Stacey stepped away because the show's direction no longer matched what he believed automotive television should be. Behind-the-scenes pressure had reportedly been mounting. More sponsor integrations, heavier product placement, glossier segments built around promotion rather than process, faster build timelines that left less room to show people how the work got done. For someone with his background, that wasn't a minor creative disagreement, it struck directly at the thing that made the show worth watching. So he made a decision very few hosts ever choose voluntarily. He left a hit show while it was still at the top of its game. The real shocking part. The surprising part was never that Stacey left. It's that he left without turning the exit into a spectacle. In today's content environment, a departure like that would likely become its own story. Tell-all podcasts, accusations, reaction videos, staged reunion drama. Stacey didn't do any of that. He simply stepped back. That restraint says a great deal about him. He was never chasing fame the way the industry wanted him to. He wanted to build things, teach people to build them, and keep real control over the work he put his name on. Once a platform stopped serving that, protecting it wasn't worth the trade-off. A rare mindset in an industry where most people who reach national TV spend enormous energy trying to hold onto that seat indefinitely. He seemed more willing to lose visibility than lose integrity. He didn't vanish because his career collapsed. He stepped back because he refused to let the machine reshape him into something dishonest. Choosing less exposure looks like disappearing. In reality, it was self-preservation. The comeback that wasn't really a comeback. After leaving trucks, Stacey didn't fade into retirement. He built something new almost immediately. In 2007, he launched Stacey David's GearZ. At a glance, it looked like a standard comeback vehicle. It was really closer to a correction, Stacey reclaiming the parts of automotive television he felt were slipping away elsewhere. Deeper technical education, unscripted builds, far less manufactured drama, and genuine creative control. This time he wasn't simply the on-camera talent. Through his own production company, Rattletrap, he became producer, director, and owner all at once. On trucks, he'd been the face of a show that could eventually be steered in directions he didn't control. On GearZ, the show moved according to his own judgment. The pacing, the explanations, and the tone all reflected his values rather than a network strategy. That's why GearZ felt familiar to fans while never feeling like a carbon copy of trucks. It carried the same spirit with far more creative freedom attached. Why bigger offers didn't matter. Once GearZ proved there was a real audience for Stacey's style, larger opportunities inevitably followed. Bigger platforms, more money, wider exposure, and the chance to push the show toward something more commercial. For plenty of personalities, that would be the dream. For Stacey, it looked like the same old trap wearing a new coat of paint. He'd already lived through what happens once a show becomes too dependent on outside demands. More money arrives bundled with more outside control, and heavier network involvement tends to mean less time explaining and more time manufacturing moments for a promo. There's little evidence he was tempted to walk back into that purely because the number got bigger. That explains why some fans assumed he'd vanished from the industry altogether. He didn't disappear from the work, he disappeared from the loudest, most commercialized version of fame. He kept building, filming, and teaching the entire time, and simply stopped chasing the mainstream machine that flattens every distinct personality into an interchangeable brand mascot. For Stacey, a smaller platform was never a downgrade. It was freedom. The garage is a classroom. The clearest way to understand Stacey David is to understand that he always treated the garage as a classroom rather than a stage. Every project needed to teach something concrete, whether that was welding technique, suspension geometry, paint preparation, budgeting, safety, or simply how to plan a build before spending $1 on parts. There was always a lesson underneath the entertainment, which is precisely why parents, shop teachers, and young builders responded to him so consistently. He wasn't showing off what only he could accomplish, he was trying to transfer confidence to whoever was watching at home. The message running through nearly every episode stayed simple. You can learn this. You're allowed to make mistakes and fix them. You can start with something rough and make it better. You don't need $1 million shop to care about doing quality work. That message carries even more weight today, given how many hands-on mechanical skills have quietly faded out of everyday life for a generation raised largely around screens. Stacey pushed back against that drift, reminding audiences that building something physical with your own hands produces a kind of pride no app can replicate. The builds that became legends. Stacey's builds stayed memorable because each one carried a distinct personality. Copperhead wasn't just a 1967 Chevy C10 with more horsepower, it made a statement about what an ordinary classic truck could become with genuine hot rod imagination. Crazy Horse wasn't just another customized Bronco, it blended classic off-road identity with custom craftsmanship, arguably helping inspire a wave of Bronco enthusiasm long before the modern Bronco's official revival made the platform fashionable again. Beyond those two flagship projects came a long list of other builds, each teaching a slightly different corner of the craft. Some honoring military history, some celebrating veterans, some leaning into movie-inspired design, and some simply demonstrating how to rescue a rusted-out vehicle and give it a second life. The common thread was intention. Stacey never built purely to fill airtime. Every vehicle handed him a fresh opportunity to teach a different piece of the craft. The industry got louder while Stacey got quieter. While Stacey kept doing things his own way, the broader automotive media landscape shifted dramatically around him. Cable television's dominance faded, streaming expanded, YouTube exploded, and social media increasingly rewarded short clips and instant reactions over patient explanation. In that fast-shifting environment, Stacey's steady, unhurried style could easily look almost old-fashioned. He was never built for manufactured outrage or disposable viral clips, and he stayed focused on craftsmanship, which can look quiet inside a media ecosystem addicted to noise. But that quiet focus turned out to be a genuine strength. The people who stuck with him didn't stay because he was the loudest voice in the room, they stayed because they trusted him completely, and that kind of trust is genuinely rare. He built it the slow way through consistency rather than spectacle, and that kind of loyalty rarely trends, but it tends to last far longer than anything that does. The current reality. The updated truth is that Stacey David hasn't actually vanished in any literal sense. GearZ remains active, and his official channels continue to promote new episodes, bonus content, and restoration footage. His production company, Rattletrap, is still tied directly to the show and has reportedly helped produce well over 200 episodes. So the more interesting question was never really, what happened to Stacey David? It's why he chose to stop playing by the old rules of mainstream automotive television. Stacey moved from being a TV personality operating inside someone else's corporate structure to becoming an independent builder and teacher operating inside his own. Mainstream spotlight coverage may not land on him the way it once did at the peak of trucks, but the actual work never disappeared. It became more focused, more deliberately controlled, and more aligned with what he wanted from the beginning. The man never left the garage. He simply left the circus that had started forming around it. The real reason he vanished from TV. So what is the actual reason Stacey David stepped back from mainstream television? He didn't step back because he failed, because audiences stopped caring, or because he ran out of ideas worth building. He stepped back because he wanted to protect the one thing that had made him valuable to viewers in the first place: authenticity. On trucks, he became well known by teaching real people how real builds actually came together. Once the show's direction reportedly shifted toward heavier sponsor pressure and less creative freedom, he chose to walk away rather than compromise. On GearZ, he built a new format specifically designed so he could own the process from start to finish. When bigger, flashier opportunities threatened to eventually pull him back into that same machine, he chose to stay independent instead. None of that reads as a disappearance. It reads as discipline. Stacey seems to understand something a lot of television personalities never fully grasp. If an audience trusts you because you're genuine, you cannot quietly trade that trust away for short-term attention and expect the relationship to survive. Stacey chose, repeatedly, to protect the garage, which is exactly why longtime fans still speak about him with genuine respect today. Why his legacy still matters. Stacey David's real legacy was never limited to the vehicles he personally built. It lives on in the builders he helped create along the way. Somewhere out there are people who learned to change their own oil because of an episode he filmed, who finally attempted welding because he made the process feel less intimidating, who bought a rough project truck because Copperhead convinced them an old C10 could become a work of art, who watched Crazy Horse and realized a Bronco could mean something beyond basic transportation. That's a fundamentally different kind of influence than a ratings number can capture. Ratings measure attention in the moment, legacy measures what people actually did afterward. Stacey's audience didn't just watch passively, A meaningful number of them went out to their own garages, bought tools, made honest mistakes, fixed those mistakes themselves and kept old, forgotten vehicles alive that might otherwise have quietly rusted away. That's why his story feels so different from the typical television disappearance narrative. He never needed to dominate every screen indefinitely. He needed to leave behind enough real, usable knowledge for other people to keep building long after the cameras stopped rolling. So what's your take? Did Stacey David make the right call by stepping away from the mainstream television machine while he still could? Or should he have stayed on a bigger platform and tried to fight for change from the inside instead? Drop your thoughts down in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into the real reasons certain automotive legends quietly stepped out of the spotlight, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next.